Hello, welcome to the Paddock Pass Podcast. On this week's podcast, we're going to be looking at the business of MotoGP, and business is the operative word within the paddock right now after the purchase by Liberty Media of Dorna Sports. For us on the podcast, once again, we're lucky that we're able to dive into our contacts book. And Adam Wheeler, you've been busy on that this week once again, but we've got Dan Rosamondo on the show.
Yeah, that's right, Steve. It's good to be able to have that sort of status, as a podcast, to be able to sort of get in contact with these people and ask them for their feedback. I think there's a lot of repercussions and ramifications of this deal that will emerge in MotoGP over the next year, possibly two. But this was just like a first sort of reaction, direct sort of from the horse's mouth. I mean, Dan was part of the investment call yesterday, shortly after the official press release came out. And it's good to get some of his views to the initial questions that we have from the acquisition.
Yeah, I thought it was really good to be able to get 10 minutes with him, and you'll hear it in the interview. He's in an airport lounge just getting ready to fly out to America. So I think it gives a good indication of just where people are willing to be able to give us that time as well. So really important, and a big thank you to Dan for getting involved on that. Dave, this was big news, obviously, and it's one that's been touted for a while. But when you see the figures involved, when you see it finally just being crystallized, it really is very significant for not just MotoGP, but motorsports as an entirety as well.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the most interesting thing to me is that Liberty is a media company. They specialize in these kind of properties, and so their expertise is in promoting big sporting and other events. Whereas Bridgepoint was just a private equity company, and all they were really interested in was the bottom line. So I think this is going to be positive. I mean, I know there's a lot of people who are sure that Liberty are somehow going to ruin MotoGP, but the people who think that are usually the same people who think that Dorna have already ruined MotoGP. So I don't quite know how that's going to work.
Dave, it's wonderful to have you back on the podcast. You're looking as beautiful as ever.
Yeah, you mean it's pale and pasty? Yeah. At least I'm wearing my Renthal Street T-shirt, so that's something for the fans out there.
Speaking of fans, obviously we've got the OnlyFans man, Neil Morrison, and Neil, how is your OnlyFans channel going?
Flourishing, Steve. Yeah.
Good to hear.
Maybe put a little link onto the show when we post it for anyone interested.
That's a question when you say a little link. But Neil, obviously, David's mentioned that they're about Liberty coming in and a media entity buying up effectively MotoGP, World Superbikes, and a lot of the road to MotoGP as well. But this is huge because when you look at what they did with Formula One, there is a roadmap there for making what was already a massive championship even bigger. And that can only be a good thing for the two-wheel world as well.
Yeah. I think there's maybe one or two caveats in there, Steve, but I think generally speaking, they have grown Formula One into one of the leading sports in the entire world, which you have to say is commendable. I think there was almost like an admittance from some of the Dorna senior staff that they had maybe taken MotoGP as far as they could. And I think when you just look at it from a very basic point of view, it's a company based in Spain. Up until last year, all of its senior management were from Spain, and a lot of people in senior positions were also from Spain or even from Barcelona. So it wasn't necessarily a company which you would say had a global outlook. And MotoGP does have a global reach and needs to have more of a global reach. So I think this acquisition will have some ramifications from that point of view. And certainly what Dan told Adam in the interview, which we're about to hear, we'll kind of go into that a little bit. So yeah, it's definitely interesting, and I think it's I'm not sure if it's all good, but I think there are definitely quite a few positives there.
Well, let's roll the tape on Adam's interview with Dan Rosamondo, the Chief Commercial Officer for Dorna Sports.
Dan, it's great to have you back on the show. It's nearly 1 full year since you were officially announced as CCO of Dorna Sports. Has it felt a long year? Because a lot seems to have changed, especially in the last couple of weeks.
I think it'll be a year actually tomorrow, my official start date. I don't think it's felt long. it's felt really rewarding to be sort of corny and honest with you. I feel like we've done a lot of good stuff. I've learned a ton. Listen, and some would say having a long year is better than a short year. So, I mean, I think it's been great. It's been great in all sense, frankly.
Dan, it's no coincidence that, MotoGP is now mostly an American identity. I mean, what kind of role have you played in this? I mean, has it been something that's been cooking for a long, long time now, or is it just coincidental, the nationality?
Yeah. These things obviously take time. There's a lot of due diligence. There's a lot of, interest in the property. I think it's part coincidental, part correlation. Let's say that. I would say that I'm hoping, and I think what's happened is our friends at Liberty have seen the same potential and opportunity that I have. And I think that's refreshing because I think that there is such great potential for the sport. The sport's already fantastic, and what we can do on the commercial side just to bring it to more people. And frankly, Adam, just really accentuate the greatness of it, not change it, not tinker with it, but just expose the greatness to so many more people. That's been my goal since day one, and I think I share that goal now with our new partners.
The last time we had you on the show was around Mugello time, and we wanted to get you back on again because I think your perspective of MotoGP initially and then what it is now has obviously changed. You've got your own formed opinions, you've learned a lot more about the sport, but just about this particular acquisition, especially, did you feel that Dorna they needed this? This was the sort of next step, the next kind of level maneuver that was necessary for the company?
I think it's the next evolution. I really do think that is the evolution for the company. I think that so much credit belongs to Carmelo and his management team and all of the employees at Dorna who have just really invested and built this wonderful sport. I think where the growth comes in is, again, understanding the opportunity, but also just I think that this world has changed so rapidly in terms of the digital environment, as you know. I mean, I don't know how many years you've got a podcast, but like the proliferation of podcasts, proliferation of social sites, the proliferation of digital media. I think the rapid change in consumption habits of consumers has really given people the initiative to go out and try to find the right partners to sort of build the business, and that's what this is about. So I would say, I don't know if they knew that, they thought that this was the only path, but this was certainly the best path for just, again, the building of the business and the building of the sport.
You guys had quite an interesting call for investors yesterday. Liberty Media CEO Greg Maffei said, that MotoGP is an unbelievable product. I think his exact words were, he saw 22 races as being fine. He kind of dismissed this ridiculous notion people might have of, motorcycle racing heading to street circuits. So the big question is, Dan, what do you think fans can expect from this change?
Yeah, well, I think fans should be, I make the honest mistake, Adam, of reading Twitter comments and reading Reddit threads. So, I think fans have to all, they are so passionate about the sport, and I think they should all take a deep breath, and anything that they see is going to be an evolution, not a revolution. I think there is, in no shape or form, does Liberty want to come in here and just mess with what this great sport is. And that product base is very American. I mean, I said it in my press conference last year, and I asked that as well. Like, we productize things in the U.S. and that's how we look at things. But it's a he also used the word visceral, which is completely correct. So I would say that the things you should look at is you should look at new ideas to engage fans, new ideas to deliver the sport in ways that people haven't seen before. I've often said we have one of the best television products out there, but it's also amazing that our television product makes the sport look so easy, which you know very well it's not. So how do we also demonstrate the athleticism of the riders? I think you'll see a lot of little changes, but I would also say they're really happy with the direction we are going and the changes that we have already sort of in place here. So I think you'll see some things that we've started to do before this acquisition, and then you'll start seeing their fingerprints on some stuff as well in working with the management team. So it's going to be the street circuit thing is hilarious. I mean, like Carlos Espeleta has to say safety and no, we can't race on streets one more time. I think his head's going to explode. So I think it was good that he disabused people of that notion right off the bat.
Dan, do you think MotoGP and Dorna may become more internationalized? I mean, you were the first sort of senior management figure to non-Spanish. I mean, do you think we might see more of that? I know it's quite soon.
I think you will. I think you absolutely will. I think I've been sort of this carnival barker shouting from the rooftop to people in the U.S. and people to come join us and come watch the race. And I think you'll see a little bit more of that on the personnel side. I think we were investigating stats, and there's been more world champions who are Americans than there have been Spanish, which is something people don't know. So I said this yesterday on the investor call, this sport is tailor-made for the American audience. I mean, it is like, it's so digestible. It's so exciting. It's evocative of, it evokes courage and bravery and sort of man trying to tame machines. It's perfect for the U.S. So we just have to do a really good job of focusing on that market, but also focusing on other key markets like the UK, like Germany, like Southeast Asia, like India, China. So there's a lot of places we need to go, and I think everyone will be impressed and fall in love with the sport.
Is this perhaps MotoGP's best chance to have some serious growth in the Americas, both North and South?
I hope so. Dude, I hope so. I just like the word growth. I'll take it wherever it comes from. But yeah, I hope so. I think that's the limitations that we had are still there. It's not. Let's give them a little bit of a pass, and all of a sudden they can't build circuits for us to race in overnight. So those limitations still exist. But what they can do is they can work with us on how they know how to take professional sports, take first-class entertainment properties, and make them relevant to fans. That's what they're going to help us with. But we still have the limitations on where we can race. We're working on that, but I don't think that's not a snap of a finger, as you know it very well.
Lastly, Dan, we have a lot of listeners who are quite passionate and followed over World Superbike. So I just wondered about your thoughts on that. I mean, will it be kind of a package deal with MotoGP, or do you think there might be some other priorities?
No, I think I again saw that yesterday in some comments that World Superbike wasn't mentioned as much. I also think we use MotoGP as a catch-all yesterday because it's we're trying to explain to a distinct community of people what a new sport is. And if we started, put it this way, when I started and all of a sudden you guys were throwing all these acronyms at me, my head was pounding. I took more Advil in the first month of my job than I've ever taken in my life just to get all the acronyms straight. So I think MotoGP includes the World Superbike. We think it's a great property. We think it does have a distinct audience and a really good future. That also goes with our talent cups. It also goes with the Women's World Championship that we're part of, World Superbike. Moto, and you've heard me say this too. I think Moto3 is this little gem that no one really that the people inside the sport really know. But every time I tell people, yeah, you should come watch race, but please also watch Moto3. And frankly, now I think actually Moto2 and with Pirelli's, I don't know, I'm not an expert, but attributed to maybe Pirelli's introduction to the sport, Moto2 has become this awesome event on Sundays as well. So I think, there was no hidden messages on this. I think we were really starting to simplify the ecosystem for everyone yesterday.
Dan, listen, we know you're joining us from the airport and you're just about to fly home. So many thanks for your time and for joining us on the show. Hopefully we'll have a longer chat again soon.
I'd love to. Thanks so much.
Adam, it was great to have Dan on the show. And obviously from your interview, you've 10 minutes for the chat for the podcast. But over the course of the last year, you've been able to chat to Dan quite a bit about what he sees from the sport. And one of the big things from just this acquisition from Liberty Media was about that visibility that MotoGP could potentially get.
Yeah, that's right, Steve. I think people tend to, especially sort of hardcore fans of sports, they tend to balk at the suggestion that things are going to go mainstream or going to go bigger because it implies a dilution of some kind, I think, in what is the essence of the product. And I'm just curious to see, people are talking about how Liberty Media will mean more visibility for MotoGP. I mean, what does that mean? Are we suddenly going to see an influx of different staff into Dorna Sports? Are they going to have much more say in their content policies? Will they change their social media structure? Something like that. We all know that Dorna operate on a TV rights deals that bring in a lot of the revenue. Are Liberty Media likely to swing around and do a lot of 180 on that and say, actually, we want to aim more for deals that go to a broader audience and increase the marketing potential? In that case, then you're looking at a vast cultural shift in MotoGP where, suddenly advertising and a whole new sort of sphere of income and commercial realities is going to have to be learned doubly quick, because I don't think it can sink into a hole and then open itself to sort of risks that you see like in the pandemic or sudden market crashes. So I think there's a lot of things we don't know, but then the record that Liberty have, as Dave said, as a media company means they want to make a sport as much like an entertainment product. It's likely to be rebranded, and that's gonna have repercussions. I think it's telling that Dan was saying that this was sort of the next step for Dorna Sports. They needed that kind of international prestige and recognition that Liberty built up through their dealings with Formula One. And let's not forget, they're not just Formula One specialists. They also have sort of other entities and other sports and other teams. So there's a really kind of vast bank of experience there. And I'm just curious as to how the immediate impact will be in Grand Prix racing.
Yeah, the interesting thing that for me in the whole investor presentation, also the press release, was they published the investor deck because Liberty Media is a public company, it's a publicly traded company. They, which is why they had the investor call. That's very different to Bridgepoint, which was private equity and had no publication and no legal obligation to actually publish their numbers. Other than inside of a prospectus. We got a real insight into the way that Dorna has made, makes its money and has made its money. The TV rights are important, and it seems that TV rights have become even more important. And throughout the investor call yesterday, there was a lot of emphasis on what Liberty felt they could do was improve sponsorship, improve the fan, the hospitality, the VIP, all that sort of thing. That is very much their sort of expertise. I mean, obviously, you go to an F1 race and it's full of celebs, and I know a lot of people hate that. But the point is that when a proper A-list celeb turns up to a MotoGP race, a lot of people who have no interest in the race are suddenly interested in it. It's exposed on the social media channels. So you're basically trying to trick people into seeing MotoGP, because once they see MotoGP, the sport itself is fantastic. The sport itself is just, the most exciting thing possible. And if they just catch a few minutes of it, then they'll get into it. And that's, I think, where Liberty is really going to make the difference. So I don't think there's going to be a big difference in terms of TV exposure, although you can still debate, the ups and downs of the upside and downside of having TV behind a paywall. It means that there's less value for sponsors, because if they're not getting the same kind of exposure, but there's a lot more value to the championship because they're getting a lot more money for it. So it's one of those things. But I do think that this is where Liberty is going to make the difference in increasing the sponsorship opportunities, increasing the interest, and finding ways to promote. I suppose promote MotoGP despite the paywalls that the TV that a lot of the TV broadcasts are behind.
Yeah, just to follow up on what Dave said about the investment call, I agree with you there. It'd be interesting to see how Liberty's suddenly sort of navigate this comprehensive labyrinth that Dorna have constructed with rights and image control and everything else. The investment call, incidentally, was basically the first sort of exposition that either party made after the official press release. And you had a series of figures from Liberty, both Liberty and Dorna, talking about the deal and taking calls from certain investment banks. I mean, you had pretty much a roll call of all the big hitters when it comes to sort of Wall Street and the sort of the FTSE or whatever. I'm not going to pretend I know what I'm talking about. I mean, we have to remember as well that this is also a deal, I think they've, correct me if I'm wrong, but agreed in principle. I mean, it's not signed, sealed and delivered yet. It's something that's going to go on for a few more months. Is that right?
It's been agreed and it's been signed. However, it is subject to regulatory approval. So it's got to go through the whole regulatory process. And I'll because it's quite interesting, and I think it will get through, unlike the CVC one, but we'll talk about that a little bit later.
Yeah, and so there were a few interesting things in the call, both from Liberty side and Dorna's side. For example, Liberty CEO Greg Maffei was explaining that, they see 22 races as the ideal amount. So they don't want to suddenly grow the calendar to sort of a Formula One extent. They believe that there's certain sponsorship packages within Formula One that could also transition into MotoGP. They feel there's a lot of potential there. They were quite sort of strict on the fact that it's a very successful product and there's room for a lot of growth. So I don't think they're looking to really come in and shake the apple tree so much. Of course, all these stupid comments you get about MotoGP possibly going to street circuits was denounced straight away. There's no stock in that whatsoever. And maybe we can talk about it in a moment, but I'm just interested to see how MotoGP is suddenly hitting mainstream news channels and the reaction of Formula One fans to this whole deal, because it's not terribly positive. It's almost like Liberty have done something outrageously bad to Formula One. So that was kind of interesting to see.
Yeah, I think just reading between the lines, I think there's quite a lot of more traditional F1 fans that are maybe a bit fed up with the new approach, which is very celebrity based. I've noticed some negative reaction to the races in America, where there's as many pictures of celebrities watching in the grandstands as there is of cars on tracks. But just kind of going back to what you were saying, Ad, I think compared to a couple of years ago, MotoGP is in a pretty good place. There maybe isn't so much need to change. I think generally the sprints have had a positive effect. Dan Rosamondo has spoken repeatedly about how the current format of MotoGP is perfect and how it's very digestible to your average kind of sports fan, even like a younger demographic of an average sports fan. Compare that to maybe 3 years ago when Rossi had just retired, when Mark was injured, and there wasn't a great deal of big character star power at the front of MotoGP. I think that's quite different now with, Mark back in Ducati, Pedro stepping up. There's quite a lot of good stories there. And just one interesting thing that, Liberty, I think, have done with Formula One. I think there was a survey a few years ago, maybe last year, where they worked out that I think the average Formula One fan roughly is around 32 years of age, and the female demographic of fans has massively grown, which I think is pretty important for, sports growth overall. MotoGP did a survey back in 2022, and I think the average age of a MotoGP fan that responded to this survey was 36, and only 13% of the respondents were females, which give a kind of indication that it's quite male centric. So this is maybe somewhere that Liberty have expertise in growing the sport in that way, and they can maybe look to doing that.
I think it's one of the interesting things, Neil, that you mentioned that, and MotoGP is in a state of growth. You look at, there's 5 manufacturers on the grid now, and all of them will have a view that they can be competitive at some point in the near future. Obviously, Honda and Yamaha trying to make their big steps, but it was interesting to see, obviously, the change with Ducati, Aprilia, and KTM making their big steps. And that shows the way that the sport has evolved as well. And just as we've mentioned, KTM, it's worth noting that obviously they support the podcast through this year. And last year, KTM made a surprise model launch when they unveiled a limited edition RC 8C track bike. And this bike sold out within minutes. And the company's now also produced a 2024 version. This isn't a road bike. It's 100% for track use, and it's focused on that. And there's only going to be 100 of these available. So check out ktm.com to see if you can sign up for the chance to buy one of these, because if you want to have a ready-to-race bike that weighs 142 kilos, has almost a 1-to-1 power ratio, and a track-focused chassis with WP parts and lots of racing spec on the bike, you want to check that out. The expectation is it's going to be pretty close to Moto2 levels of performance. So definitely a bike worth looking at. And probably the most interesting thing about it, Adam, you've ridden Portimao And the launch for this, or the handover event for this, is going to be in Portimao on the 8th of May. And this is when you'll get a day at the track, setting the bike up just for you. There's a meet and greet, a dinner and all that. Lots of VIP experience for it. So something definitely worth checking out on KTM.com. Neil, just to look at the growth of MotoGP as well, one of the things that was interesting on the call for Adam with Dan was when the topic of America was spoken about as well. Obviously, Dan's come over from America into his role. Unusual at that time for Dorna to bring in someone from outside Spain or Catalonia for a key role. And when you look at Trackhouse coming in, an American team, obviously we're going to COTA next for the next round of MotoGP, the TNT Sports deal as well to bring the TNT coverage to the US. There's been a big step to try and make MotoGP bigger in the US. And then this news, obviously, it's made a lot of press coverage over in the States as well. $4.5 billion for purchasing 83% of the company as well. It shows that Liberty are making that big investment. America's only going to get bigger and more important for MotoGP, you'd imagine.
Yeah, you would have to say so, Steve. I think when Dan came in in his current role last year, he was saying that basically, if you can get something to work in the US, then the rest of the world will kind of follow. And that's certainly been the case with Formula One, just in terms of growing its fan base there. And then basically you start to get some really big sponsors or blue chip kind of sponsors involved, which I think is important, obviously, if the sport wants to grow. And yeah, there have been a few steps in that direction. You mentioned, Steve, about the new TV deal over there with Trackhouse coming in as an American team. We're maybe getting ahead of ourselves, but if Joe Roberts continues his good form, maybe there could be an American rider in MotoGP before too long as well. And these are kind of things, little blocks that could eventually lead to a bigger kind of market share over there, because I think there's still a long way to go for MotoGP, but Liberty have proven experience in that regard. You just need to look at some of the crowds that have gone to the Grand Prix of the Americas, Formula One race in recent years. Hundreds of thousands of fans, which is, a crazy amount more than we've seen in MotoGP recently. So yeah, this is another area you would definitely expect them to address.
Dave, you mentioned... Sorry, go on ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I think Neil's right there. I mean, I don't think the waters have ever parted in a more emphatic way for Joe Roberts to seize this as a career kind of opportunity. I mean, not only is he finished on the podium just for his home Grand Prix, but this whole American swell of interest is now building up. I think it's also exciting, Steve, for possible ramifications for Moto America. We haven't seen that many strong kind of talent schemes established in the US. I mean, that would be something I think Liberty will want to be building on. Just looking at that home market possibility, they have some strands of it, of course, in Formula One, but then maybe there's much more potential, and there's certainly just as, if not stronger, US heritage and history inside MotoGP compared to F1. So it's that's exciting stuff. And I think, we're talking about Joe Roberts, but like Neil says, what about Trackhouse? I mean, what a fantastic time to join the championship. There is just a lot of untapped audience potential there. So I'm really curious to see who Liberty Media bring in, and what they're suddenly going to do in cohesion with the rest of the current sort of Madrid-based Dorna team to make some pieces move around on the chessboard.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you think about Trackhouse as well, because a little bit like when this news is broke, when the Trackhouse news story broke, we immediately had Justin Marks on the podcast as well, and Justin was talking about it's not imperative to have an American rider. He wants the right American rider. He wants a competitive American rider. So as far as Joe Roberts is concerned, his podium last time out can't come at a better time. Now he needs a good result in COTA, a good result at the first few European rounds, because a little bit like what we said when Justin was on the show, it's about being competitive in that first half of the year for Joe and then giving him the opportunity to earn that MotoGP seat. And that's going to be the key thing for him. Dave, you mentioned about the regulator and the fact that this is agreed in principle, and you need to make sure that it goes through all the red tape to be able to come to this. I'm really surprised that this wasn't just a case of a truckload of $4.5 billion just being handed over in cash. I thought this was going to be just like buying a car and it was done and dusted.
It's well, it's only 4.2 billion. You see,
sorry.
They paid.
It always depends on which currency you're looking at.
Exactly.
I went to XE.com for that.
Yeah, exactly. The Liberty themselves are paying 3.5 billion, and the entire company is valued at 4.2 billion. Bridgepoint did very well; they made a couple of billion off of that, and the Canadian pensioners should be sitting pretty as well, because they made about $1 billion off of it as well. But to get back to the question of regulation. The problem was, what happened was 2006, CVC owned MotoGP and had the opportunity to buy F1. They bought F1 and then got it in front of the European Competition Commission, the EU Competition Commission. And the Competition Commission said, most of it is okay, but we're worried about the market power of having the two leading motorsports championships, the two premier motorsports championships, selling their broadcasting rights, having one body selling their broadcasting rights. One of the interesting things to come out of the investor call was that they said that Liberty said that people at CVC were on very tight deadlines to get the deal done, so they had to make a decision. Once they got the decision back from the Competition Commission, they could have appealed it. They could have tried to change things to make it more acceptable, but they didn't have simply the time to actually work it through. There's a lot more time to do this, and that means they think they're going to have time to be able to do it. Also, the way the deal is structured, there's going to be no bundling of MotoGP and F1 rights. They've made that very clear. There are MotoGP and F1 are going to be two very separate results. MotoGP will still be run by Dorna, by the Espelators, all the rest of it, and so you're going to get that. They're going to keep it apart. That meant they're much more confident about it actually getting through the regulators. It's not just the EU; it has to go in front of, I think, the FTC in the US. It has to go in front of Brazil and various other national regulators who could stop it. And it is specifically about TV broadcast right deals. Also, they'll be talking a lot, or there's a lot of there was a lot of discussion about. Sort of the TV rights, keeping everything separate, not getting those two mixed up together. It seems like they have a much better handle of it, and they're prepared for this. It felt like the CVC deal, they weren't really prepared for the Competition Commission. I think this is one of the first things, when the deal became available, it was one of the first things that they actually looked at. So it really feels like they will get this through. My initial reaction was it's not going to happen because of the Competition Commission. Now I think there's a very, very good chance that it will. It'll just take some time.
I think it's one of those situations as well, Dave, where the people financial journalists, financial experts, financial legal people have all said to the media that this is a deal that can happen. At the end of the day, we're motorbike racing journalists. This is considerably above our heads. And I think anyone that's in the MotoGP paddock or in racing given a definitive view on this, it's worth taking with a little bit of a pinch of salt, because it's not something where we're full-on experts through. You do have to talk to people in those industries, and they seem pretty buoyant about it being a possible, well, not a possibility, but something that should go through. So I think, as it stands right now, I'd agree with you that this is one of those things that you'd have to think looks pretty positive right now. Adam, just very quickly before we move on, we've got a Chaz Davies interview coming up, just where he talks about his return to racing in MotoE. But just to close off on this topic, I think one of the things for me about this deal is there's 24 MotoGP races, there's 22 MotoGP races, 24 Formula 1 races, and 12 World Superbike rounds this year. That would equate out to basically we could have a race a weekend across all of these championships. If the same company owns these, you'd have to say for Liberty Media, inventory is key. They own the Atlanta Braves in Major League Baseball. In baseball, you've got 162 games as a regular season. So you have 6 months of just pure league action before you get into the playoffs. They know the importance of cornering a market. And I think that's one of those things that when you look at Formula One and MotoGP and Superbikes, this is one of those things where potentially you could really align how to lay out your season a lot easier now whenever it's the same people owning all of them.
Yeah, it's a great point, Steve. I mean, it won't really matter to the entire group. I mean, I think the first mistake you can make is to think that a MotoGP fan really cares about Formula One. I mean, we have a very staunch advocate of that on this podcast. But, it's also, I think, from Liberty's perspective, as you say, you could have racing from January to December. If they sort of organize it properly, then they're covering, the whole year round in terms of events and coverage and sort of maximizing their properties. I mean, we won't really care if Formula One's racing in January or until sort of December the 25th. But, in terms of their prospective empire, then it works out nicely, and they can also avoid clashes and trying to put the whole thing together. I mean, I'm staggered at the start of every single football season that, people manage to work out the complex weave of fixtures between all the various competitions, and now sort of Liberty have their mitts on every single significant more high level world championship. I mean, significant's the wrong word. And what are they going to do with that? And also, other sports as well, like sort of MXGP, Supercross, other motorcycle racing series, Speedway. How are they going to try and sort of fit into this puzzle as well? It's as you say, Steve, it's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, I think it's also worth pointing out that right now, both the FIM, or FIM, FIA, Dorna, Formula One, all work together when they're actually putting their calendar together, because they don't want too many clashes. So that's already going to say. And again, there was a lot of emphasis on the fact that MotoGP is going to be run by Dorna. It's going to be pretty much left alone, left as it is. So I don't expect too much interference from the rest of it. And yeah, I mean, I think they're going to be, like I said, they're going to be kept separately, and they're going to, I don't think fans are going to see a lot of change in the short term. Maybe in the longer term, there'll be, like more promotion. It'll become more visible. It'll become a more prominent sport, but we're not going to see a lot of difference.
Steve, I wanted your opinion on World Superbike, but Dave, Neil, I think we can also agree that at last, maybe now, they can sort out the fucking mess that is the Australian Grand Prix and actually put MotoGP on a decent time at Phillip Island for a change.
I think for me, one of the things that's interesting from a Superbike perspective is this does change a lot about what World Superbikes has to be, because when you're effectively owned by a hedge fund, you have to turn that profit. You have to keep making sure that there's a return for the Canadians, for them to be able to have a good pension. Whereas now it will be interesting to see how that changes the perspective of what World Superbikes can be. We've got a championship this year, 12 rounds, 11 of them in Europe. The big reason for that is to try and sell World Superbikes to individual tracks around the world is quite difficult, because they need to be able to pay to host the race. They need to be able to take on all the costs involved of having a World Championship race. And then are you going to be able to sell enough tickets for it? It's a lot easier to sell tickets in Europe in the summer than it is to sell tickets, in warmer climes in March. So I think this is one of those things that long term it'll be interesting to see how Liberty handles something like that. David, you mentioned that Liberty are going to take a hands-off approach. They took a hands-off approach initially with Bernie Ecclestone, and within 6 or 9 months, Bernie was gone from the championship that he created. So you don't spend that sort of money to leave things the way they are. You spend it because you want to try and make more out of it. And I think it'll be interesting to see long-term how that changes. I think one of the big things for me in Superbikes that's going to be interesting is to see how Liberty handle negotiations for circuits as well, because they will have a position where they're able to bundle together a deal with circuits, and they can keep their broadcasting deals separate. But if you go to somewhere like Bahrain, they could treat that the same way that MotoGP has treated Qatar for a long time and say, okay, if you want the Bahrain F1 Grand Prix, well, we're going to have to try and put in a Superbike round or whatever else. And that's how you could potentially bolster the Superbike calendar. And I think for everyone in World Superbikes, there's a lot of uncertainty now, but I think there's, speaking to people within the paddock, there seems a little bit of excitement as well to see how it all plays out.
Yeah, and to come back to Bernie Ecclestone, when Liberty took over F1 and got rid of Bernie Ecclestone, well, for a start, Carmelo Espeleta is 80 and sort of getting towards the end of his career. He's still extremely active. He's still very fit. He's still sharp as a tack. But I think he is looking to take things a little bit more easily. But apart from that, the biggest difference is that when Liberty Media took over F1 as a championship really needed change. It really needed to be, sort of the whole approach to it needed to be changed. That isn't the case with MotoGP. Greg Maffei, the Liberty CEO, said, we love the championship. The championship is great. There's nothing wrong with it. It just needs promoting properly. That's the issue, and that's what they need to do. And again, that to me, I think is the most is their biggest role. And just quickly about SBK, it was interesting that they didn't say anything about. I think WorldSBK got one very, very brief mention. But I think you make a very good point. There is no longer. It's not just there to make to turn a quick profit anymore. For a private equity fund, you would hope that Liberty would talk to Dorna about finding ways to promote the World Superbike Championship as well, to make it bigger. Because, the racing's fantastic. As a fan, the experience of being at a race is just superb. It's much better to go to a World Superbike race than it is to go to a MotoGP race as a fan. So I think there is room there for Liberty to actually really make a difference in boosting the role of World Superbikes in the future.
Also on the investment call, Carlos Espeleta said there were 5 circuits that MotoGP share also with Formula One. That's not a great deal. So it implies even more that there's not a great deal of synergy that these two sort of, properties can have. And for what it's worth, I thought Dorna's and Carmelo's talk on the investment call was fantastic in terms of what they've done for the championship and the level they've raised it up to. But Carlos Espeleta, he's been sort of the sporting director of the championship now for a couple of years, but, I think he's incredibly switched on and he has a very good appreciation of what the vulnerabilities are of Dorna's work and, the areas that they need to improve. So whenever he's kind of talking, I think for MotoGP fans, it's really worth sort of like listening extra carefully because he will sort of drop hints for the future sort of direction of the sport.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Dad. And it'd be interesting to see over the next 6 months to see how things could evolve. I'm quite keen to hear what you guys have to say after Coda and then obviously the first Jerez then as well. So that'll be quite good to see. Just before we move on to our Chaz Davies interview, 2024 is the 25th anniversary of Fly Racing. And when people think of Fly Racing, they think of off-road product, but they've got a lot of street gear as well and some real high-quality jackets, gloves, and protection systems. So while they may not be the first brands that comes to mind when people are thinking about getting some street gear, they definitely do have a lot of good gear. And David, I know you've used quite a bit of their gear over the last few years.
Yes, I've got I've got some of their gloves and one or two other bits and pieces, and it's just it's good, solid quality kit. It's comfortable and good value.
Yeah, have a look at flyracing.com to see what they can offer. They also have a little bit of mountain biking gear as well, and I know that's something that Neil's been busy on his bike over the last couple of days as well. Let's move it on to our Chaz Davies interview. And Neil, you're Mr. MotoE for us, and it was quite exciting to have Chaz back on the grid in Portimao.
It was, Steve, yeah. The biggest, I think, the highest profile addition to the field this year for sure. But I think, as Chaz will explain to Ad and to the listeners in a little while, it's not super easy coming back into elite competition like MotoE, especially when testing is so limited, because I think Chaz had one preseason test, 3 days. It was rain interrupted, I think, on most of the days. And you have 3 sessions in those days, and each session is 15 minutes. So it's not exactly like you're getting a whole host of time to go out there and get up to speed on Michelin tires on a completely different kind of bike, even if Chaz did help develop the Ducati V21L. It has had some changes since he was working as a kind of development rider. So yeah, it's kind of a tall order. and he's up against guys that have been in the class, racing in the class since 2019. So, yeah, I think he's playing a bit of catch up, but we all know what a quality rider Chaz is. And yeah, I'm sure eventually he will get up to speed and, be fighting somewhere towards the front MotoE.
Yeah, and let's hear what Chaz has to say, because it's a long interview and lots of good insight from it. And it's quite strange to think. Let's hear from the rookie, Chaz Davies.
Chaz, thanks for talking to us. It's great to have you on the podcast. And I think a photo of you popped up on social media the other day, when you first started back in MotoGP. And I had a quick look at your career, and you set a few records for like youngest rider to achieve a few things. I mean, point scores, point scoring races. It's a long old journey, and then you're back in the Grand Prix paddock again. So how does it feel?
Just the 22 years later, here we are. No, it feels good. It's nice to be here. I've genuinely not been to that many GPs in the last, since I've been in the Superbike paddock. I could probably count on one hand how many GPs I've actually attended. May have dropped in on a Thursday or a Friday. So to be here in like a semi-permanent fixture, and it's nice. I'm really enjoying it. I love this sport. And in Superbike, working there, but also riding or just being involved in different ways. I love everything about it. So, I mean, I feel like a bit of a tourist here at times as well. So it's good. It's enjoyable. There's obviously the serious part is the on-track activity. That's where that's what I'm here for in MotoE, and all that's obviously very new to me. And getting back to full-time racing is something. Okay, not that many races, but is something that is a step that I didn't know I was going to take, but as things have sort of developed quite an organic way, here I am, and lining up against the other guys and girls on the grid.
You mentioned youth. Well, I mentioned youth as well, but you're racing and being full-time committed to this paddock and this way of life has been your sort of MO for so long. So how was it kind of breaking out of it when you stopped in Superbike, and then you had that sort of moment to concentrate on the family, do other things, and then you came back in a bit of a coaching role, also working for Ducati, developing the MotoE. How was it? Did you feel like that breath of fresh air was something that was really welcome, or did you get a bit of itchy feet?
No, really welcome, to be honest. I've had a long career, as you just mentioned. I've been here, there, and everywhere. And
yeah, I mean, US. There's so many different contests, championships. It's quite cool to look back on it.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know if it's, I can't actually put my finger on what it is that really kind of made me feel very done in the World Superbike paddock. Was it burnout? Was it family? I don't feel like it was those things. I just feel like it was kind of circumstances. The writing was on the wall a little bit. I didn't feel as motivated as what I once was, and I've always sort of said, if that motivation wanes a little bit, if the focus goes away, then don't put yourself there. Like, don't.
Is it the cliche about fun, or is it a bit more than that?
A bit more than that, I think. It was like, that the intensity has left me a little bit, and by that I mean the mentality that a lot of riders have, and that to a certain extent I believe that you have to have is a win at all costs. It's it's very much win or bin. That's.
Was it also the search for improvement? Because I guess you kind of look every week or sometimes every day and think, well, what am I doing, or how can I be better? That must be tiring.
Definitely, yeah, it is tiring. Always, you feel like you're on that treadmill. That is, and it's a great life, and there's nothing to complain about whatsoever. It's just, there's a lot of other things in life that are very good as well, and then you have a family come along, and there's just so many options out there, aren't there? And I do feel like if I had to pin it down to one thing, I would just say I was probably a little bit bored of doing the same thing all the time. And as I said, the writing was a little bit on the wall for me, although there were options to continue in a similar situation to what I was in my last year in World Superbike, which was in a private team but with essentially sort of factory support. I didn't want for too much there, to be honest, but I felt like I needed to break away from, if I was going to do something, I needed to try something fresh just to inject the right energy back into me. I didn't really see that there were good options out there for that. So why accept something that's substandard and then go and scratch around for positions that you're capable of better for a year? And that just isn't me at all. I'm either lining up with a thinking that I can fight and go and training for those same reasons, going and getting up every day and going and working towards the goal of, yes, with this package I can go and win races or fight somewhere up the front. So accepting less than that is just not in me.
But no, I guess at some point you realised I would like to do something else, but in the same field,
Yeah, and that developed as well. So obviously I have a close relationship with the Ducati guys, with the Aruba guys in particular, and our team, the network that we have. I've been with those guys even when essentially the structure was with the same team that run the BMW team that I rode for in 2013. So we basically spent a lot of years together as a group. Then Aruba came in 2015, and we just had a very good sort of relationship there. And they came to me and put forward the rider coaching role, and it wasn't something that I had really looked for or thought about at all. I had no plans. I actually wanted to go on a beach and literally turn off the mobile phone for 3 months. But my wife said that we've got 2 kids now and we're more responsible than that. So
it's a little difficult in Andorra as well,
yeah.
exactly next to the beach.
I had this massive pipe dream that when I retire, I was like, I will go to a beach in, be it Bali, or it wasn't going to be in Europe. And I'm going to really learn how to surf well, and I'm not going to do anything with my phone. But just kids wreck those pipe dreams, don't they? You've got responsibilities there in school, nursery, and the rest of it. So
become a taxi driver.
Exactly, yeah. That didn't happen. Ended up getting back into the paddock straight away. And honestly, right now, I'm so glad that opportunity came, and I did go that route and stay involved rather than going sort of cold turkey, because as I said, I love everything about this sport. So,
but how was the coaching, Chaz? I mean, just because great riders are good at what they do doesn't necessarily mean they can explain it or helpful. But how did you find that? Was that effective or was it rewarding?
Both, yeah. I think really rewarding, and I think having sat in that seat of the guys that I'm helping out, Alvaro and now Nicolo this year, but in the past years, Michael Rinaldi, having sat in that chair and understanding the dynamics of the garage and the pressures and everything like that, especially in a factory Ducati team, there's a lot of things that are tricky to manage. And I think having that experience of being a rider and knowing when knowing when you want the inputs from somebody else, I think has helped me to, approach Alvaro at the right time when, he's a very regimented guy and every minute is kind of mapped out in his day. So just working in around that, and this is all stuff that I've, wanted to, I don't want to be that sort of overpowering guy that's going, you need to do this, that, and the next thing. You have to remember that the guys that I'm working with, they're in the top percentile of bike races in the world, and you've got to add detail to their game. It's not about reinventing the wheel, and also with the engineers, it's just connecting dots. And that's like how I feel that I've approached the job in that way. I'd rather say a little bit less than a little too much, and bring information at the key moments through technology, and that counts a lot in Ducati because everything's data led. So if you can back up maybe a slow sector with a video to prove that, and a particular kind of overlay video of a couple of different riders with various examples, and kind of gold plate your evidence that way and present it across, that's how you got to work with.
So you're not actually just going in and saying this is what I think you should do, you're actually sometimes showing and having to
most of the time, because words are hot air, aren't they? Like, you can I can say anything. It's just, at the end of the day, it's an opinion, and you can say, it looks a bit this way or it looks a bit that way. Obviously, I have experience, but I feel like it doesn't count for enough at this level. You need to back it up with some data, and data in my case is video, and that video then plays a part in showing the engineers what's going on, maybe a different line for the rider, and how one rider's interpretation of the corner is maybe different to our guys, and or sometimes you find that we get to a point where maybe we can't do anything to help Alvaro or help Nicolo or Rinaldi last year, but at least he's aware of his problem, and that's something that he's got to manage for the early part of the race. Maybe it's gonna as the tires drop at the other riders, like we had this a lot with Toprak and Alvaro. It's like understanding where Toprak's strong in the beginning of the race, because the Yamaha was particularly strong at that point, and just sort of like holding station, don't get too carried away at that point, and educating. It's not like Alvaro, you need to be faster there. It's this is going on. I'm not really looking for a change or telling you to do anything different, but just be aware of it, and it'll calm down. That difference will sort of subside after 6-7 laps.
Did you find that you had to learn ways to communicate, especially because very well from riders have different different moods or different mindsets?
100%.
Also, throughout your career, Chaz, you must have had a wealth of people that were good and bad in terms of giving you advice, so you could have had a selective picking of the best bits of those characters, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I think the communication in this job is such a key part, and that's something I've had to learn as well, because it's part of coaching, isn't it? Like a way to approach a rider, and everybody's different, and understanding the needs of each guy and how they want that information. And do you present them a critique? Do you say, do this or do that? Or do you ask them a question and then get them to reply to you and then talk through it? Those kind of things, where I found myself in a position where you've got you just have to understand the character of the rider and how to get the best out of them. And it's actually quite a fun, rewarding part, because you get to it makes me work, isn't it? It's not just, it's very easy to go in there and just shoot off and talk, but it's at the same, you have to think about a lot of it.
I can imagine you're the kind of guy that really embraces that side of it, the multi-dimensional task aspect, because even when you were racing, you were thinking a little bit outside of the box, in terms of your vlogs and how people perceive me and how I present myself. There was a rounder picture to you as a professional. So I gather in your new role, you're also trying to think, well, what can I do to make that better?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's in me. I like to try and understand how we can do things better, and I think maybe that doesn't always come across with me that well, and obviously in some cases it does, but it doesn't. I think my wife is probably the best to attest to that. Like if I'm going to do something, it gets done to the best of my ability, and keep pushing it, and that is where I get fulfillment. And in this job, again, that's just pushing myself really as much as anything. Like just going, okay, you're a rider coach, and you can make that pretty basic, but you can also, without making it seem overly complicated in the background, there's some stuff that you can do with the technology side as well that do make a difference. So yeah, but
can you use anything like the guys in Supercross do? Is it Dartfish or these kind of composition programs that put to the two camera shots side by side? Is that something you can look into? Or
yeah, we're using that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's you can do, it's just essentially like some ghost imaging type stuff, or side by side imagery. If the ghost imaging isn't maybe you stood in slightly different places, you can get technical with it, or you can just put simply 4 videos side by side and do it that way. It's not the best way of doing it, but you got to relate all that then to the timesheet. You got to relate it to the tyre. You've got to understand what your rivals are on, which in World Superbike we don't have the beauty of understanding what tyre or how many laps are on it, which is a challenge. So there's always that element, especially in testing, where it's a real nightmare to try and figure that stuff out. And because you can compare a fresh 2-lap SCX to a 10-lap SC1, you're going to get very different results. Whereas here, obviously, everything is written down for you on the timesheet at the end of the session. So,
did you have a good break from riding a motorcycle fast then? Was a good period of months even before, say, like Ducati and MotoE popped up?
Yeah, I would say my riding has been pretty sporadic over the last couple of years. I've dabbled in endurance, I've dabbled in the tests, as you mentioned, with MotoE, but again, you're a test rider then, you're not skirting with the limits, and you've got you've just got to do the job that is asked of you. Whereas, the endurance riding, again, that's kind of, it's not the same. It's more intense than testing, but again, you're not at 10 tenths like you are here or any other sprint race. So I've not really had that adrenaline rush for a couple of years now since.
Yeah, you drip fed it, I guess.
Drip fed, and I think I can probably count maybe 5 events that I've done in the last 2 years. So it's not a lot, and it's definitely not keeping me bike fit enough. But luckily, a MotoE race is 7 laps. So
was it quite easy for you to lose the competitive aspect of your life that's been there for so long? I mean, I know you could apply some of it to the rider coaching role, but that kind of little bit of a fire that's always inside you. You mentioned it kind of due to circumstances it becomes less and less, but then is it kind of always there on the background, or how do you sort of satisfy that?
No, for me that definitely went away a bit. Like I said, the intensity and the competitive side of me sort of definitely ran out a bit. I don't think I've ever been the most competitive person, but I made myself competitive as a racer to try and be successful.
You had to, I guess, as well.
You have to. I had to, and I had to. It was partially a conscious decision as a youngster. And to be honest, a lot of hanging around with Casey Stoner will get you pretty competitive. So, and honest, I'm not kidding. Like, everything's a competition with him, and that rubbed off a lot on me. And I think that helped me. Try and be more competitive, but it's not probably naturally in me to be super competitive. I can just put myself in that position, and I have done for a lot of years. So I think when that starts going away a little bit, it's easy to kind of like back off and go, that's enough, kind of thing.
But we're talking now after your first race day, really back in MotoE. How does it feel? I mean, is almost like a rookie sensation a little bit?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, yes and no. Obviously, got the rookie tag having never raced MotoE before, but I'm far from a rookie in the rest of as far as bike racing is generally concerned. But I've enjoyed the weekend. It's been it's nice to be back and sort of pushing limits. I do like that, and getting a feel for the bike when you're pushing on, but. There's a lot that we've got to figure out. I've got to figure out the Michelin tyres, which is a big point, but also what I've realised, this bike is it's well designed, but it's also quite basic as well. You can't change a lot with a MotoE bike. It's all kind of presets that you got to choose from. So, but what it means is when you've got 225 kilo, when you're playing with a mil here or a mil there of ride height or something like that, it actually makes a huge difference. Like, the bike is very sensitive, so because you're throwing that much weight back and forth, it changes the dynamic of it a lot. And I feel like 1 minute I feel like we're on a path to getting the bike as I like, and then we try something else, and then you just overshoot the point that you want to get to, and then you go the other way and you sort of undershoot. So it's a bit weird at the minute. I'm in this kind of zone where I'm not sure if I'm going to get the bike that I really want. There's always going to be issues, but I just feel like there's a lot that we're not piecing the puzzle together just yet. But it's early days, and I've had very few laps on it. So
speaking of early days, tell me about the very first sort of phone call or email or something you had from Ducati saying, can you come and help us, or can you ride this, or tell us what you think? Were you curious? I guess, someone says, come and ride this brand new prototype project, it must be like, right, okay, let me have a go.
Yeah, I was really curious. As probably has come across, like, I'm quite into technology side of things as well. So for me, there's a stigma, isn't there, about e-bikes, and of course I don't want to see MotoGP racing e-bikes anytime soon, but there's a place for everything, and e-bikes has a very strong place in this paddock, and I think it's cool. I think it's at the end of the day, it's a bike, 2 wheels and handlebars, and that to me is something. When there's this different technology coming forward, it's an interesting thing to be involved in. So those early conversations it was Paolo Ciabatti, Gigi. They were happy to sort of have me involved in it and get the feedback. Dorna also wanted different bums on the seat, and to understand how it was with 2 bikes on track following each other. So there are all sorts of interesting parts of the testing procedure as well, and also just being in the garage. I've worked with Ducati for a long time, so you get used to the faces that you see popping in the garage and electronics engineers and whatnot. But there was just all these new faces started turning up, and you're asking people what they're, what's your role and what are you here for? And they're like, oh, I'm a expert in battery technology and such like. And it was just an interesting thing to be involved in from that standpoint. So yeah, enjoyable.
Were you honestly surprised the first time you sort of sampled the performance?
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. I was didn't know what to expect. It was weird as well because I went out of Mugello and even to a certain extent still now, with a superbike you tend to just slow things down a bit in the middle of the corner, make sure you pick it up and get the maximum sort of footprint out of that rear tire and get going that way. But Mugello, big open flowing track, I was finding myself using the first session out, using what I know, which was superbike sort of corner speeds and trying to pick up the bike. And I quickly realized that I was like, oh my God, I have to ride this thing like a Moto3. It literally, you've got to send it on the side of the tire. So you can brake hard on it, but at a certain point you've got to ditch that front brake and chuck it on its side and trust it. And it's good for it as well. And I quite quickly realized that, but then adapting to that is very tricky for me because it's very unnatural to where I've been for a very long time. So, but yeah, it was in other ways it sort of surprised me. That was probably the biggest surprise, maybe the riding style. I felt like, you sort of would think, and I think a lot of people think that the torque on this bike would be, obscene, just masses of torque. But obviously, Ducati know how to build a nicely mapped engine, let's call it, and they know the grip limits of a rear tire, and in the end that's what you're working towards. You're working with torque numbers and newton meters and a grip limit of a rear tire, and matching those two things they basically just take the numbers from the internal combustion engines that they know and cross-reference them with the torque from the electric engine. And they know that that's somewhere in the ballpark. It's a nicely mapped throttle, which is the progression of the throttle. And by that I mean that, like, say you open the throttle 10%, how you get to that 10% and how much power you get to that 10% with this bike is like 10% of a V4R, which is probably like pretty similar to 10% of a GP24. That kind of thing, because
so it's in ratios almost. But
yeah, basically it's all it's done to the grip limit of the rear tire. So that's the thing probably that there wasn't with the previous e-bike. I think a lot of people said it was kind of like a light switch on the throttle, because they don't have that experience probably to really map the throttle nicely and calm things down and have a really nice progressive linear feel to it.
I think most people's experience with electric bikes are you open it and it goes.
Yeah.
I mean, even on dirt bikes, you can wind the thing to the stop and then you just hang on, really.
Yeah.
So it must. I mean, it's fascinating to hear how intricate it is, and I guess we shouldn't be surprised. But I mean, having had the first couple of races on it, how have you found sort of managing racecraft and stuff like that on the e-bike and the pack and
There's not
even
a lot
just
of racecraft in a 7-lap race?
Well, so you don't get much time for it, but even just the dynamics of overtaking and outbraking, is it vastly different, or is it, pretty much what you know?
Yeah, pretty much what you know. I think being that the bike's got less power than what I've been used to, I would say is probably more of you've really got to run it through a corner pretty hard to create that opportunity to lead to a pass. It's not like you can these bikes that what I've sort of realized today is that you don't get a lot of slipstream off them. I mean, you do, but it's not that effective. At least it wasn't for me. So I felt like at times I got a reasonable run onto the start-finish straight, and I'm right there, and I'm in the slipstream, and nothing really happens from there. It's like everybody's at the kind of torque limit. I don't know if it's weight or what, but I kind of wouldn't go forward from there. So you have to get a little bit more creative. If that was on a superbike, I think I'd probably pull at least partially alongside and then go for an out brake in turn one. But I'm coming from behind the rear wheel, and it's a bit of a lunge. So yeah, there's that side, which for sure is something that I've got to get my head around as well. But definitely I think there's not a lot of strategy in the race at all. Just go for it. And it's such a short race as well. It's literally like a superbike sprint, which is 7 Superbike Sprint is 10 laps, but this is 7 laps qualifying, basically.
Chaz, I know you've been submerged in the Superbike world for so long, but I just wondered about your views on Grand Prix racing. Moto2, Moto3, there seems to be a lot more opportunity for parity now, what with the tyres, the technical packages and stuff like that. Is that something almost you look at and there's a little slice of you that thinks, I wish, I could have had that sort of opportunity when I was racing back in 125s or 250s. I mean, that kind of opportunity with the technical platform.
Yeah, I never really think of it sort of for myself, but I think of it for the guys that are coming through today. Like, what an amazing opportunity it is for those guys now to sit on that grid and look across and go, well, he's on the same bike as me, he's got the same tyres as me. You've basically got your variable is your team, and it kind of begins and ends there, because all the technical packages are roughly the same. Let's call it 99% the same. And that, compared to where we were 22 years ago, where I was 22 years ago in this paddock, it couldn't have been any further different to that. In 125, in 250, it was just a completely different ball game then. And it was probably peak, I would say probably peak unfair in some ways. I mean, factory to a kit bike there were streets apart. But not only you think the obvious things, you think, maybe it's chassis a bit better and the engine goes a bit better, but it was like the rideability of a factory Aprilia 250. When you followed it, it was clearly more rideable than the thing that's got 10 horsepower less, because the thing that's got 10 horsepower less has been pieced together with sort of parts that are mismatched and ignition mapping, which is built for that exhaust, but not that not that state of tune. Those kinds of things, where today everything's pretty much the same, and it's just so good for, I think, to see for kids to get a fair crack at it, for youngsters, Moto3, also in the CV and Italian Championship, whatever. It's just like, at least that excuse kind of goes out the window a bit, because they were, back in the day, not only that, the factory teams have factory tyres, which you might have heard me say this before, but I actually accidentally got Dovizioso's tyre sheet in Valencia once, the last Grand Prix of the year in 2004, and compared to mine was like a couple of lines on a piece of paper, and his was like a book. It was just like numbers that I'd never seen, and at that point I didn't really know that there was a difference really with the tyres, but it wasn't even comparable. So yeah, to race in this era, it's very difficult. The competition is extreme. I think the way to get to Moto3, like, it's hard. I believe some of the hardest years, unless you're a super talent like a Pedro Acosta, but some of the guys that it's not clear how talented they are, their hardest years are sometimes in the lower categories, in like your Spanish or your
talent cups and
rookies,
and
more like just breaking through, and maybe they're a little bit more ready for a bigger bike, or their talent expresses itself on when they jump onto a Moto2, or then even a MotoGP bike, if they sort of like that, they get the momentum behind them. And I think that the Moto3 Talent Cup side of things is so easy for a good rider to sort of not come through in those years. But still, everybody's got pretty equal opportunity, and that's the great thing.
Paddock's changed as well. I mean, there's now like 3-story Red Bull hospitalities.
I'd be happy with that as my house. I think most would.
Yeah. I mean, it just makes me smile when I think back to your sort of homemade trailer that Casey and you shared, going to Grand Prix. They wouldn't let you in the paddock with that now, genuinely, would they? They'd be like, you're not bringing that in. There's probably some sort of health. Did they even have a window? I'm not sure.
No windows. No, don't need them.
They'll makeshift bunk bed and a PlayStation or something.
Yeah, rough. Yeah,
but character building, I mean, must make you smile to think back in those days.
It does, yeah. I wish we had, in a way, a few more sort of a phone in the pocket where you could take videos and pictures of that sort of thing, because it was, I mean, when I think back to it, we had this crap little TV set up where we used to, in between sessions, we would hammer, it was MotoGP, I can't remember what the name, 2002 or 3 or 4 or whatever it was. We'd just play that in between riding. We just get back on the bikes, but on the PlayStation, and then back on the real thing, and so on and so forth. And Again, the competitive element of Casey there was like, that was alive at all times. So as soon as you get back on Takuma Aoki at Sachsenring on the V twin, and set a lap time without the traction control on, because that's the only thing that Casey allowed, and try and go toe to toe on that. So yeah, it was good times. When I think back at it, it was absolutely compared to today, where this paddock is so professional, and there's a very high standard across it. It was very different, but I'm grateful for all of it.
I'm sorry to ask you, because I'm sure everybody does, but do you still keep in contact, Casey, or does life, families and continents pull you apart?
Yeah, I mean, naturally, I think he's in Australia, we're in Andorra, but no, of course, whenever he comes over to Europe, we always catch up, or try to catch up if schedules allow. We're in contact several times a year, but obviously he's not on the doorstep, so but no, very much whenever Casey's in town, we try and make a point to get together as the families as well.
Do you think there's anyone that you see in Grand Prix that has the same kind of sensitivity and feeling that he sort of brought to racing? I mean, is somebody like Acosta heading in that direction, or obviously Mark has his own reference, but
that's a difficult one. I mean, I have first-hand experience of Casey. I mean, on the mentality side of things and how he approached his racing, but also in riding the farm bikes at his place, or the little Honda 150s at his place in Australia, and doing stuff like that, and seeing his talent. Okay, I raced against him as well, but putting him on in different environments and seeing his talent in different ways, and I mean, I don't know, really, quite honestly, without experiencing firsthand, the talent of Pedro Acosta, going and seeing him and doing those kinds of things. Like Casey he's incredible, so special, and so in tune with what a motorcycle is doing and how to adapt himself, and such clever usage of his tools, especially rear brake. Like almost, I've said it before, but like a violin player, but with that rear brake. I mean, just every 0.1 of a bar is fed into it. It's almost like electronics controlling it. But yeah, he was obviously, as we all know, ridiculously special. And there are other many special riders out there. But I do believe in some areas Casey was that bit, that little bit more. He had that little bit extra.
Chaz, just to sort of lastly put you on the spot a little bit, maybe it's somewhat unfairly, but I mean, you're sort of right up there as one of the most successful and best superbike riders from the British Isles. There's a little bit of a problem with British talent sort of coming through to World Championship level at the moment. Do you think it's quite chronic, or it's not as bad as it seems, and just give it a couple of years, maybe there's a few people coming through, or there's a wider issue?
Yeah, no, I definitely think there is a wider issue. I'm more than happy to answer the question as well, because it's sort of, I mean, you can wait and wait and wait and wait, but I think that it's difficult being from the UK to have that environment around you as the kids do here in Spain, or they do in Italy. We don't have the weather for it, for a start, and I think that in Spain is the hotbed of where everything sort of grows up, and it's kind of just, I mean, it just runs, doesn't it? The system just runs, and the kids are flying at such a young age. And I think that everything together, it just promotes these kids to get on with it when they are really young. Where in the UK, I think we have this little bit of a meandering path where nothing is quite that. It's just not quite that clean cut as it is over in Spain or in Italy. Spain for sure leads the way. And what's the solution to try and get more talent from the UK? And I honestly think it's so difficult. But what I would like to see is some sort of academy where kids are given an education in Spain. you want to go all in on this motorcycle racing? There's an academy in Spain, like they do in tennis. There's full tennis academies where you do your education on site, because that's the huge problem, is that you can't pull kids out of school all the time to go and ride motorcycles. I mean, you can just sack off the system, but you also can't do that easily these days. But it's difficult as well, because every mum and dad wants their kid to go through school and whatnot. But going back to what I think, in my opinion, needs to happen is I honestly don't see much improvement until kids are put in that environment from a very young age. And to do that, you need to have everything around them where they can essentially live their life that they would be living in the UK, but they're in this kind of academy where they're on a path to become a professional motorcycle racer, and it's got everything around that.
Well, they have these sports specialist centres, don't they? I think even like in Mallorca, Isan Guevara is, a product of the same sort of thing, where his education and his training is all based around preparation for his discipline, which happens to be motorcycle racing. Know that. Yeah, it's having two kids now, one of them about to go into the university sort of system in Spain now. These places exist. So like you say, if they also have motorcycle racing as part of that consciousness, then there's a head start. But like you say,
balancing the riding, like being on the bike, going back to Pedro Acosta, he rides so much, and that's something in Spain, and why I moved to Andorra is to have all that on my doorstep, because I wake up every morning and you have an excuse as to not go to ride your bike. And in the end, seat time on any motorcycle is seat time, and you hone your skills and improve yourself. And Pedro Acosta, I don't think he shows half as much as what he does on track. I have it on pretty good authority that he just rides a bit like Tito Rabat style, maybe not quite that to that extent, because Tito's pretty extreme, but he spends a lot of time on the bike, and that's a guy who's at the top of his game in the top class, and he's still working like that. And that's the sort of grounding that they have here. I keep saying here, but in Spain, that to me, it's just necessary. And also another thing as well is, obviously BSB is fantastic. It's such an amazing championship, but I would like to see a little bit more drive to try and get the talented kids out of BSB earlier. And there's no real crossover at the minute, especially in the superbike class, for example. You can't wildcard anymore because the rule set is just too different to World Superbikes. So even if somebody's got quite good talent, it's quite difficult for them to get a break on the world stage, because the wildcard thing is just too difficult for the BSB teams to go and get the full package. Plus the rider's got to learn the bike for the weekend, and you're only going to show so much when things are like that. But if you think back to when, I think like 2008, when there was Cal and Tom Sykes and Johnny at the same time, like all those guys showed something as wildcards, and they were like straight on the scene, shaky, really show something. I think, okay, that's not the youth side of it. We're not talking about real youth development of that, but these are guys that led to be world champions, to be, in Cal's case, very successful Grand Prix riders, and that's so difficult to do now. Jake's done it. Jake's here, and he's done well to break away, but it's just not that simple. And obviously BSB wants to keep their own grown talent, and fair play to them. But it hurts, doesn't it? As a Brit, you just want to see that those guys coming through and given good opportunities.
Well, Chaz, they've closed the door to us here on the Alpine Stars office. That either means they're going to close up or they're getting ready for dinner. But listen, we've held you for so long. Thanks ever so much for joining us on the podcast. It's been great to talk to you. Hopefully again, and hopefully seeing you on the podium at some point in Grand Prix this year.
I hope so. It'd be nice to spray that champagne again.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Great to have Chaz on the show, and Chaz is always one of the most insightful riders, and certainly in my time working in WorldSBK, anytime you get the chance to sit down for coffee with them, you always learn something, and I think that was the case once again in this interview as well. So thanks to Chaz Davies for doing that, and had a good interview for us to get on the pod. But before we move on, there's always the not so good. There's the MotoGP fantasy, and we've got nearly 900 players on our fantasy this year. So just search for the Alpine Stars Paddock Pass Podcast Fantasy League, and the winner of this over the last couple of years has gotten a great gift pack from Alpine Stars. And Adam, should we mention fantasy, or is it too much of a sore subject for you still?
No, I'm sort of firmly mid-pack, Steve. Queen's Park Rangers are heading in the same direction, so mediocrity rules.
Yeah, and QPR getting a little bit closer to safety in the championship. But Neil, are you getting any closer to getting the team that you want to have in fantasy? Because obviously there was the disaster of the Qatar round for both of us.
Yeah, well, nothing has changed, Steve, since last week when I was publicly humiliated on this show because we haven't had a race. There hasn't been a chance for me to right the wrongs of the first two rounds. But yeah, I'm sitting pretty in 831st, which is, it's going to make a great story when I make a thrilling comeback to finish in the top 20 like I did last year.
It's interesting, actually. You're 831st. Dave, you're probably 832nd, even though you've done both rounds.
I will have you know that I am actually 401st. So that is solidly mid-pack. Yeah, no, I mean, look, I made the mistake of keeping Pekka Bagnaia in my team, which he had one of those weekends, really. So, yeah, and now all I'm doing is looking at how on earth I'm going to manage to wangle Marc Marquez into the team ahead of Kota.
Yeah, I've managed to put Mark into my team. I dropped Pecco actually to put Mark in my team.
Yeah, same. That's definitely the road to the road that I think I'm going to be going down.
Yeah, so we'll see how that plays out for next week, but I'll be giving him the turbo anyway and seeing how that plays out. Neil, just to move it on from fantasy, on patreon.com/Paddock Pass Podcast, we've had a lot of additional content over the last 6 months. We've had lots of people signing up for it as well. So if you want to sign up for it, the Paddock Insider is probably the pick of the tiers. That's the one that gives you access to our Paddock Notes show, which is our daily roundup show from a Grand Prix weekend. But it also gives you access to a really good interview that Neil did recently with Hervé Poncharal.
Yeah, that's right, Steve. I spoke to Hervé in Portugal just before the Portuguese Grand Prix. And Hervé was saying, I think maybe sometime this year we might be able to think of a podium with Pedro. Lo and behold, he goes and does it that very weekend. But yeah, Hervé, always great to speak to and really interesting about how Pedro has kind of worked so well with that team and some really great insights about how he worked during the Valencia test and how he's basically just got the kind of personal touch which has made all the team really, really like him and really want to work for him and with him. And yeah, if you become a Paddock Insider on our Patreon, then that interview is there and accessible to everyone. So check out patreon.com/Paddock Pass Podcast to find out more.
Yeah, and what are you waiting for? Just get signed up for that. But Adam, for our next podcast, we're going to have a preview for Kota for the next round of MotoGP, and we've got some pretty special guests coming up in the next couple of shows.
Yeah, I hope so, Steve, with an American flavour. And then we're talking all about all this Liberty media acquisition. I'd assume that Dorna would have some sort of press conference. Like we said, there was this investment call. It wasn't really for the media, and we were briefed that they would not take any questions from the media. There were more, as we said, from financial specialists, and the questions are very orientated around the sort of financial stock of the championship, as well as Liberty's current view on what they're going to be doing. So you would imagine there has to be some sort of media debrief happening at the Circuit of the Americas. So that would be something we could report on. Maybe we can throw it onto Patreon, or it'll be in our Paddock Note show on a daily basis. But yeah, we've got one more show before round 3 of the championship. I'm flying actually to London on Tuesday because I've got to get an early flight to Houston on the Wednesday morning. But hopefully we'll be back next week.
Yeah, well, we'll definitely be back next week, and we'll have an action-packed show. Dave, it was great to have you back on the pod this week as well. And obviously for everyone, there's been a lot of support for you, Dave, and that goes threefold from all of us as well. So great to have you back on the pod.
Yeah, and thanks. And people have been just immensely kind. So it's been genuinely touching. I don't know what I've done to deserve it, but I'm sure you'll get your own back at me at some point.
Yeah,
baristas around the world.
For a different reason, Dave. Obviously, for us on the Paddock Pass Podcast, as ever, a big thank you to Renthal, Street, KTM, and to Fly Racing for supporting the pod, and for everyone that supports us on patreon.com/Paddock Pass Podcast as well. We'll be back next week as we look forward to the next round of the MotoGP World Championship at the Circuit of Americas.